The Vampire King received a call from a waitress at 3:17 a.m. His son collapsed in the street. "Who is this?" The voice on the other end of the line didn't ask. It commanded. It was a baritone deeper than the thunder rolling over the city, a sound that vibrated against Valeria's ribs. I don't know," Valeria stammered, gripping the cheap burner phone, her knuckles white against the neon glow of the diner sign. Rain plastered her hair to her cheek. "But there's a boy. He's on the pavement outside Sal's 24-hour. He's not breathing right." This was the only number in his pocket. There was a silence on the line, a heavy, suffocating pause that felt like the air leaving a room. "Do not let him close his eyes," the voice said, the menace replaced by a terrifying urgency. "If he sleeps, he dies. I am coming." The city of Oakhaven didn't sleep. It just fermented. At 3:17 a.m., the district of Lower East was a watercolor painting, left out in the rain. Smeared greys, bleeding reds from tail lights, and the sickly yellow of sodium street lamps reflectively dancing on the asphalt. Valeria Stonebrook hated the 3 a.m. shift. It was the hour of the wolf, or in her case, the hour of the drunk, the desperate and the lonely. She wiped down the counter of Sal's, the scent of stale coffee and industrial lemon cleaner clinging to her uniform. Her friend and roommate, Sylvia Evercrest, was in the back, loudly scraping a grill and humming a pop song that had been popular 5 years ago. "Val, we out of decaf?" Sylvia shouted, the mundane reality of their lives piercing the quiet hum of the refrigerator. "Check the bottom shelf," Valeria called back, her eyes drifting to the large plate glass window. That was when she saw him. He wasn't a drunk. Drunks stumbled. They possessed a sloppy, fluid momentum. This figure walked with a rigid, painful precision, like a marionette with tangled strings. He was young, perhaps 20, dressed in a coat that cost more than Valeria made in a year. Black wool, tailored, soaking wet. He stopped directly under the flickering O of the open sign. He looked up, his face pale as moonlight, and then he simply crumpled. It wasn't a fall. It was a collapse of architecture, a building demolition in slow motion. "Sylvia, call 911!" Valeria yelled, vaulting over the counter, ignoring the protest of her knees as she shoved the glass door open. The rain hit her like a physical blow, freezing and relentless. Valeria skidded to her knees beside the boy. Up close, he was terrifyingly beautiful. High cheekbones, raven hair plastered to a forehead that burned with a fever so intense she could feel the heat radiating off him through the rain. "Hey, stay with me," she commanded, tapping his cheek. His skin felt like marble left in a kiln. He groaned, a sound of agony that made her stomach turn. His eyelids fluttered, revealing irises that were a startling, unnatural shade of violet. Contacts, she thought, though the rational part of her brain recoiled at the sheer luminosity of them. "Father," he rasped, his hand clawing at his coat pocket. Father." Valeria reached into the pocket, expecting a wallet or a smartphone. Instead, her fingers brushed against a heavy velvet texture. She pulled out an old-fashioned flip phone, sleek and black, with no branding. There was no contact list, no recent calls, just a single speed dial entry labeled King. She pressed it. The connection was instantaneous. After the terrifying exchange with the man on the other end, Valeria dropped the phone to the wet pavement, her hands shaking. She looked back at the boy. His breathing was shallow, hitching in his chest like a broken gear. "Help is coming," she whispered, brushing the wet hair from his forehead. "Just hold on." The rain intensified, drumming a frantic rhythm against the pavement. The street was empty, save for a stray cat seeking shelter under a dumpster. But suddenly, The hair on Valeria's arm stood up. It wasn't the cold. It was the sensation of being watched, predatory and intense. She looked across the street. In the shadows of an alleyway, a figure stood watching them. It was tall, draped in a trench coat, holding an umbrella that seemed to absorb the light rather than reflect it. The boy, Tristan, suddenly gripped Valeria's wrist. His grip was iron-strong, bruising. His eyes snapped open, the violet irises swirling with a sudden, horrifying gold. "Run!" Tristan whispered, his voice sounding distinct, overlaying the sound of the rain. "He's not the only one coming." Valeria turned to look at the figure across the street, but the alley was empty. When she looked back down, the rain around Tristan was sizzling, turning to steam upon contact with his skin. The arrival of Benedict Frostmore was not heralded by sirens or screeching tires. It was announced by silence. The rain seemed to hesitate. The ambient noise of the city, the distant sirens, the hum of the electric grid, dampened, as if the world were holding its breath. A sleek, matte black vehicle, long and low like a panther, glided to the curb. It had no engine noise, just the sound of expensive tires crushing wet gravel. The door opened. Benedict emerged. He was tall, looming over the car's roof. He wore a suit of charcoal grey beneath a heavy overcoat, his presence demanding immediate attention. His face was a landscape of sharp angles and hard lines, handsome in a way that felt ancient, like a statue weathered by centuries of storms. His eyes were the color of frozen lakes, pale, piercing blue. He didn't run. He moved with a blurred velocity that Valeria's eyes couldn't quite track. One moment he was by the car. The next, he was kneeling beside her, his expensive trousers soaking in the puddle without care. "Tristan," Benedict said. The name was a prayer and a curse. He touched the boy's forehead, and Tristan's body arched, a guttural cry escaping his lips. Benedict's face twisted in fury. He looked at Valeria, really seeing her for the first time. His gaze felt like an X-ray, stripping away her defenses. "You touched him," Benedict accused, his voice low. "I was trying to help," Valeria snapped, fear giving way to indignation. "He was dying on the sidewalk. Would you prefer I stepped over him?" Benedict paused, the pale blue eyes narrowing. "You touched his blood?" Valeria looked at her hands. There was a smear of red on her palm where Tristan had scratched himself on the pavement. Maybe. I don't know." "Edgar is here," Tristan gasped, clutching his father's lapel. "The poison. It's meant for you." Benedict's expression hardened into granite. He stood up, lifting Tristan, who must have weighed 180 pounds, as easily as if he were a rag doll. "Get in the car," Benedict commanded Valeria. "Excuse me?" Valeria scrambled to her feet, backing away toward the diner. "I called you. I did my Good Samaritan deed. I'm going back to work." "Look at the alley," Benedict said, not turning his head. Valeria looked. Emerging from the darkness across the street were 3 figures. They weren't human. Their movements were jerky, disjointed. Their eyes glowed with a sickly green luminescence, and they were smiling, mouths too wide, filled with teeth that looked like shattered glass. "Edgar Hawkerhurst has sent his scavengers," Benedict said, his voice devoid of fear, filled only with a weary, lethal annoyance. "They have smelled Tristan's blood on you. If you stay here, they will tear this diner apart to get to the marrow of your bones. Get in the car." Valeria looked at the warm, safe light of the diner where Sylvia was likely wondering where she was. Then she looked at the monsters crossing the street, their claws dragging sparks against the asphalt. "Open the door," Valeria said, her voice trembling but resolved. She scrambled into the back seat of the black car. The interior smelled of old leather, ozone, and something metallic, like blood and copper. Benedict deposited Tristan beside her, then slid into the driver's seat. As the car door sealed shut, silencing the rain, one of the creatures lunged. It hit the window right beside Valeria's face. She screamed, recoiling. The glass didn't break. The creature's hand shattered against an invisible barrier. Blue light rippling across the surface. Benedict didn't even flinch. He pressed a button, and the car surged forward, pinning Valeria to the seat. They accelerated from 0 to 60 in under 3 seconds, leaving the Sal's 24-hour and her normal life disappearing in the rearview mirror. "Where are you taking me?" Valeria demanded, clutching the door handle. "Somewhere safe," Benedict replied, his eyes watching the road and the mirrors simultaneously. "Or as safe as one can be when the House of Hawkerhurst has declared war." Tristan coughed beside her, a wet, hacking sound. He grabbed Valeria's hand again. His skin was cooling rapidly now, swinging from fever to ice. "Don't let go," the boy whispered, his eyes rolling back. "You ground me. You're quiet." "I'm definitely not quiet right now," Valeria cried out. "Your soul," Benedict said from the front seat, his voice strange. "He means your soul is quiet. Most humans scream in the psychic spectrum. You are silence." Valeria stared at the back of his head. "I have no idea what you're talking about, and I want to go home." "You cannot go home, Miss Stonebrook," Benedict said, turning the car onto a private road that wound up the cliffs overlooking the city. "You have been marked by the blood plague. Until I know if you are contagious or if you are the cure, you belong to me." The Frostmoor estate was not a house. It was a fortress dressed in Gothic revival drag. Perched on the highest cliff of Oakhaven, it loomed against the storm-bruised sky, a sprawling mass of dark stone, spires and modern glass extensions that jutted out over the ocean like crystal daggers. The car hissed to a halt in a circular driveway paved with cobblestones. The rain here was fiercer, driven by the sea wind. The front doors, massive slabs of iron and oak, swung open before Benedict even killed the engine. A woman stood there. She was severe, dressed in a long grey gown that looked like it belonged in the 19th century, her hair a silver helmet of tight braids. This was Gwendolen Frosthall. Benedict was out of the car in a flash, pulling Tristan from the back seat. "Gwendolen, the solar plexus, he's burning!" Valeria stepped out, shivering, her waitress uniform soaked and pitiful against the grandeur of the mansion. She hugged her arms around herself. "And who is this stray?" Gwendolen asked, her voice sharp as a scalpel, eyeing Valeria with undisguised disdain. "The girl who found him," Benedict said, rushing past her into the grand foyer. "She is exposed. Isolate her in the east wing. Do not let her leave." "Wait!" Valeria shouted, following them into the cavernous hall. The floor was black marble, reflecting a chandelier that looked like frozen tears. "I am not a contagion. I am a person." Benedict stopped at the foot of the grand staircase. He turned slowly, the weight of the fainting boy in his arms seemingly negligible. For a moment, the mask of the king slipped, revealing a father terrified of loss. "You are a complication," Benedict said softly. "But you saved him when I was too far away. For that, you have my protection. But do not test my patience tonight, child. My son is dying." He vanished up the stairs with supernatural speed. Gwendolen turned to Valeria. "Follow me." "Touch nothing." Valeria was led through corridors lined with portraits of people who looked suspiciously like Benedict, painted in styles ranging from the Renaissance to abstract modernism. The house was cold, kept at a temperature that preserved things, or perhaps just suited the dead. Gwendolen opened a door to a room that was nicer than Valeria's entire apartment. It had a 4-poster bed, a fireplace that ignited automatically as they entered, and a wall of windows facing the stormy sea. "Food will be brought," Gwendolen said. "Do not attempt to leave the grounds. The hounds are fed only once a week, and today is not that day." The door clicked shut. The lock engaged with a heavy thud. Valeria stood in the center of the room, trembling. Adrenaline was fading, leaving behind exhaustion and terror. She walked to the window. Far below, the city lights twinkled, a world she had been ripped from in the span of an hour. She paced. She sat on the velvet bed. She checked the burner phone, which she had instinctively pocketed. No signal. An hour passed. Then 2. The silence of the house was oppressive. Benedict had called her silence, but this place was a tomb, driven by a need to understand, or perhaps just a refusal to be a prisoner. Valeria tried the door. To her surprise, it wasn't locked from the outside, or rather, the mechanism was old and finicky. With a jiggle and a shove, it popped open. She crept into the hallway. She could hear voices drifting from down the hall, from behind a set of double doors that stood slightly ajar. She moved silently, her sneakers squeaking faintly on the marble. As she neared the room, she heard Benedict's voice, raw and ragged. "It is Edgar. He used a synthetic compound. It attacks the vampire biology, but masks itself as human flu. It's brilliant and cowardly." "Can we purge it?" Gwendolen's voice. "I don't know. His heart. It's beating too fast. It's trying to compensate." Valeria peeked through the crack in the door. The room was a medical bay, filled with high-tech monitors that beeped in dissonance with the antique furniture. Tristan lay on a table, stripped to the waist. His chest was covered in black veins that pulsed beneath his pale skin. Benedict stood over him, his hand over Tristan's heart. A soft, blue glow emanated from Benedict's palm, seeping into his son's chest. Valeria watched, mesmerized. She realized then that the sound she had been hearing wasn't the machinery, it was a rhythm. Thump, 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 thump. But it wasn't coming from the room. She closed her eyes. She could hear a heartbeat, slow, powerful, like a tectonic plate shifting. That was Benedict. She could hear Tristan's, frantic, fluttering like a trapped bird. But underneath it all, she heard a third sound, a dissonance, a scratching noise, like static on a radio, coming from inside Tristan's chest. "It's not a virus," Valeria whispered, stepping into the room before she could stop herself. Benedict spun around, his fangs descending, razor-sharp and terrifying. He snarled, a sound that should have sent her running, but Valeria stood her ground, pointing at the boy. "It's not a virus," she repeated, her voice steady despite the monster facing her. "Listen to it, under the heartbeat. It sounds like ticking." Benedict froze. He looked at her, then back at his son. He leaned his ear against Tristan's chest, closing his eyes. The silence stretched, taut as a wire. Then, Benedict's eyes snapped open. The blue was gone, replaced by a void of pure black fury. "Gwendolen," he whispered, "get the scalpel. It's not a sickness. It's a transmitter." He looked at Valeria, the monster receding, replaced by a look of bewildered awe. "How could you possibly hear that?" Valeria hugged herself, feeling the cold of the room seep into her bones. "I told you. I listen. It's the only way to survive the night shift." Benedict stepped toward her. He didn't look like a king now. He looked like a man drowning. "Then listen closely, Valeria Stonebrook. Because whatever is inside my son, it just started counting down." The medical bay was bathed in the harsh, clinical glare of halogen, a stark contrast to the gothic shadows of the rest of Frostmoor Estate. The air smelled of ozone and ancient dust. I cannot see it, Benedict hissed, his hands hovering over his son's open chest. The incision he had made with the scalpel was precise, bloodless due to his own command over the fluid, but his composure was fracturing. The necrotic veins mask the device. If I cut blindly, I will sever the aorta. Valeria stood at the head of the table, her hands gripping the cold metal edge until her knuckles turned white. The sound in her head was deafening now, a rhythmic, scratching, mechanical noise that seemed to claw at the inside of her skull. "I can hear it," she said, her voice trembling. It's moving. It's trying to hide from you." Benedict looked up, his pale blue eyes wide with a desperate intensity. "Guide me. You must be my eyes, Valeria. Tell me where to cut." "I'm a waitress," she choked out. "I serve pancakes. I don't do heart surgery on vampires." "You're the only one who can hear the bomb inside my son," Benedict roared, the sound shaking the glass cabinets. Then, softer. "Please." Valeria took a deep breath, closing her eyes. She focused on the noise. Tick, scratch, tick. It was distinct from the wet, organic thud of Tristan's struggling heart. It sounded like metal legs scuttling on bone. "Lower," she whispered. "Behind the big valve on the left." Benedict's hand moved. He held a pair of long, silver forceps. "No, wait!" Valeria snapped her eyes open. "It moved. It went up, near the collarbone. It knows you're there." "It has AI," Gwendolen muttered from the corner, where she was preparing a tray of strange, glowing syringes. "Edgar's tech sorcery." "Close your eyes again," Benedict commanded, his voice a steady anchor. "Don't look at the blood. Look at the sound." Valeria obeyed. She visualized the sound in the darkness of her mind. It was a jagged red line in a sea of black. "It's latching on," she said, panic rising. "It's digging in, right atrium. It's going to burst." "Hold him down," Benedict shouted. He didn't wait. He plunged the forceps into the incision. Tristan's body convulsed on the table, a scream tearing from his throat that sounded like tearing metal. "Left! A little left!" Valeria screamed, feeling the scratchy noise vibrate in her own teeth. "Now! Grab it!" Benedict twisted his wrist and pulled. There was a sickening squelch, followed by a high-pitched mechanical shriek. He ripped his hand back, holding a writhing, spider-like object made of black chrome and pulsating red glass. He threw it across the room. "Gwendolen!" The older woman raised a shotgun-like device and fired. A blast of concentrated UV light hit the mechanical spider in mid-air. It disintegrated instantly, bursting into a cloud of ash and sparks before it could hit the floor. Silence rushed back into the room, heavy and sudden. Tristan gasped, his chest heaving. The black veins began to recede, fading like ink washing off in water. His heart rate monitor slowed from a frantic buzz to a steady, rhythmic beep. Benedict slumped against the operating table, bracing his weight on his elbows. He hung his head, breathing heavily. For the first time, Valeria saw the sweat on his brow, the tremor in his hands. He looked mortal. He turned his head slowly to look at her. "You," he breathed. "You have ears like a bat and nerves of steel." Valeria slid down to the floor, her legs finally giving out. "I think I'm going to throw up." Benedict was beside her in an instant, not as a predator, but as a support. He offered her a clean linen cloth. "Breathe. It is done. You saved him." "That thing," Valeria shuddered, wiping her mouth. It sounded like it was laughing. "It was," Benedict said darkly, helping her to her feet. "It was transmitting our location. Edgar knows exactly where we are." The sun did not rise in Oakhaven. The darkness merely turned a lighter shade of grey. By noon, the storm had settled into a sullen, misty drizzle. Valeria sat in what Benedict called the war room, though it looked more like a library from a Victorian mystery novel. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves lined the walls, filled not just with books, but with maps, scrolls, and screens displaying security feeds of the estate perimeter. She was wearing clothes Gwendolen had provided, a soft cashmere sweater and tailored trousers that fit surprisingly well. Her waitress uniform had been burned. Biohazard, Gwendolen had sniffed. Benedict stood by the fireplace, swirling a glass of dark red liquid. "It is wine," he said, catching her stare. "A vintage Pinot Noir. Though to my kind, the distinction between wine and blood is largely a matter of texture." "Is Tristan okay?" Valeria asked, holding a mug of tea with both hands for warmth. "He is sleeping. The healing trance will take days, but he will live." Benedict took a sip, watching the flames. "You have questions?" "I have a million questions," Valeria said. "Starting with, what are you? Who is Edgar? And why did you call me Silence?" Benedict turned, leaning against the mantel. "I am Benedict Frostmore, head of the Frostmore Coven. We are the old guard, keepers of the ancient laws. We believe in coexistence with humanity, in shadowing ourselves." "And Edgar? Edgar Hawkhurst is a radical, a futurist. He believes vampires should not hide. He uses technology to enhance our biology. He wants to rule, not exist." Benedict's face darkened. "He put that device in my son to assassinate me. If it had detonated, it would have released a nanite plague capable of wiping out this entire coastline." Valeria's grip on her mug tightened. "So I stopped a plague. You did." Benedict walked toward her, stopping just outside her personal space. The air around him felt charged, electric. "Which brings us to you. Silence." He sat in the leather armchair opposite her. "Vampires are psychic predators, Valeria. We sense fear, heartbeat, thoughts. It is a constant noise to us. But you are a void. When I look at you with my second sight, I see nothing. When I listen for your mind, I hear nothing. Is that bad?" "It is incredibly rare," Benedict said softly. "It is a genetic anomaly found in human lineages that have interacted with us before. It makes you invisible to our mental compulsion. It makes you immune to the fear we project. That explains why I didn't run when you snarled at me," Valeria mused. "Indeed, most humans would have been catatonic." He leaned forward, his blue eyes searching hers. "It also makes you a threat to Edgar. His technology relies on biofeedback. You possess none. You are a ghost in the machine. So he wants to kill me. He likely wants to dissect you." Benedict said it matter-of-factly, which somehow made it worse. "But I have sworn to protect you, and the Frostmore word is iron." There was a moment of quiet connection, a fragile thread of trust spinning between them. Benedict wasn't just a monster. He was a tired general fighting a war he was losing. And Valeria wasn't just a waitress. She was an anomaly, a puzzle piece he hadn't expected. "My roommate," Valeria said suddenly, sitting up straight. "Sylvia. She was at the diner. If Edgar tracked us..." Benedict's expression shifted, a flicker of guilt crossing his face. He pulled a remote from his pocket and clicked on one of the wall screens. It showed a news feed. "Local diner fire," the headline read. "One missing." Valeria's tea mug shattered on the floor. "No," she whispered. "My scouts report the building was empty when it burned," Benedict said quickly, standing up as she rose. "Valeria, listen to me. Sylvia was not found in the wreckage. That means Edgar has her. He took her because of me." Tears pricked her eyes, hot and angry. "He took her as leverage," Benedict said. "He knows I have you. He wants a trade." "Then we trade," Valeria said, her voice hard. No. Benedict's voice was a growl. You do not understand. If Edgar gets you, he unlocks the ability to bypass every defense the old guard has. The world ends. I cannot trade you. She is my best friend, Valeria shouted, shoving his chest. It was like shoving a wall, but he took a step back, respecting her anger. And I will get her back, Benedict vowed. But on my terms, not his. Suddenly, the lights in the library flickered. The security screens on the wall turned to static, then went black. The electronic lock on the door chirped and died. Benedict spun around, his posture shifting instantly into a combat crouch. The power didn't fail, he said, his voice dropping an octave. It was cut. The darkness in the house was absolute. The storm outside masked any sound of approach. Stay behind me, Benedict commanded. He didn't need light. He moved with fluid assurance in the pitch black. Valeria grabbed a heavy iron poker from the fireplace. I'm not staying behind anything. I'm helping. Benedict paused, and she could feel his amusement in the dark. Very well, but do not die. It would be inconvenient. They moved into the hallway. The silence of the house was broken by the sound of glass shattering downstairs, multiple windows, a coordinated breach. They are in, Benedict whispered. Scavengers. Maybe a lieutenant. They reached the top of the grand staircase. Below, shadows moved in the foyer. Flashlights' beams cut through the gloom. Tactical, military-grade lights. These weren't mindless monsters. This was a strike team. Human mercenaries, Benedict analyzed. Augmented. They are working for Edgar. A red laser dot danced across Benedict's chest. Down! He shouted, tackling Valeria just as the air cracked with the sound of suppressed gunfire. Bullets chewed into the plaster where they had been standing. Benedict moved. He vaulted over the banister, dropping 2 stories into the center of the strike team. Valeria peeked over the edge. It was a blur of violence. Benedict was a whirlwind of shadows, disarming men, throwing them across the room. But there were too many of them, and they had weapons that glowed with UV light, burning him on contact. "Suppress the target!" one of the soldiers yelled, his voice distorted by a mask. "Secure the girl." 2 soldiers broke away from the fight and sprinted up the stairs toward Valeria. Valeria didn't wait. She ran back towards the medical bay. She needed a weapon, something better than a poker. She burst into the room where Tristan lay. Tristan was awake. He was sitting up, weak but conscious, his eyes wide and glowing violet. "Behind you!" he rasped. Valeria ducked. A soldier swung a rifle butt where her head had been. She swung the poker, hitting him in the knee. He grunted, mechanical servos whirring in his leg, and backhanded her. Valeria flew across the room, crashing into a tray of instruments. Pain exploded in her shoulder. The soldier loomed over her, pulling a zip tie from his vest. "Target acquired," he radioed. "She's quiet, no psychic signature." Tristan tried to get up, but collapsed, too weak. The soldier grabbed Valeria's arm. In desperation, she grabbed a scalpel from the floor and slashed. She missed his armor and sliced her own palm deep. Blood welled up, bright, red, human blood. The soldier froze. He looked at the blood. Then he screamed. Smoke began to rise from his armor where a droplet of her blood had landed. It hissed like acid. The soldier let go, stumbling back, clawing at his face, as the fumes from her blood seemed to burn his skin through the mask. "What?" Valeria gasped, clutching her bleeding hand. Benedict appeared in the doorway, his suit torn, bleeding from a dozen wounds. He saw the soldier writing on the floor, the smoke rising from Valeria's blood. He finished the soldier with a swift snap of the neck. He looked at Valeria, then at the smoking corrosion on the soldier's armor. His eyes widened in horror and realization. "Tristan," Benedict said, his voice shaking. "Did you see that?" "Yes," Tristan whispered, staring at Valeria with a mix of awe and fear. "It burns the alloy. It burns the infection." Benedict walked slowly to Valeria. He took her bleeding hand, not with hunger, but with reverence. He watched as a drop of her blood fell onto the floor, hissing as it ate into the sterile tile. "You aren't just a null," Benedict whispered, looking at her as if she were a bomb he didn't know how to defuse. "Valeria, your blood is weaponized against them. It is toxic to the Hawkerhurst line." Valeria pulled her hand back, terrified. "What does that mean?" "It means," a voice crackled over the dead soldier's radio, "that you are the daughter of the alchemist." Valeria stared at the radio. The voice was smooth, digital, and terrifyingly familiar. It was the voice that had answered the phone the first night, but stripped of the distortion. She recognized the cadence. "Edgar," Benedict snarled at the radio. "Hello, old friend," Edgar's voice purred. "I see you've found her, the lost heir, the girl whose blood can undo everything I've built. Bring her to me, Benedict, or the waitress, Sylvia, is it, dies screaming." The transmission cut. Valeria looked at her hand, then at Benedict. The fear was gone, replaced by a cold, hard clarity. "He wants my blood?" she asked, wrapping a bandage tight around her palm. "He fears it," Benedict corrected. "Good," Valeria said, picking up the fallen UV rifle from the dead soldier. She checked the charge, her movements surprisingly natural. "Then let's go give him a transfusion." Edgar Hawkerhurst didn't hide in shadows. He hid in plain sight, wrapped in the arrogance of untouchable wealth. His stronghold was the Zenith Tower, a 70-story needle of glass and steel piercing the smog of the financial district. It was a monument to corporate hubris, a monolith that looked down upon the city like a judging god. "We cannot walk in the front door," Valeria whispered, peering through rain-streaked binoculars from a rooftop 3 blocks away. The wind whipped her hair across her face, carrying the metallic taste of the storm. "He'll have thermal scanners, heartbeat monitors, probably a receptionist who breathes fire." "We are not walking," Benedict replied, adjusting the cuffs of a fresh tactical suit Gwendolyn had unearthed from the armory. The fabric was woven with Kevlar and threads of silver, shimmering faintly in the gloom. He looked less like a king now, and more like a wraith of war. "We are falling." Valeria lowered the binoculars. "Falling? You can't be serious. That's a 3-block gap." Before she could protest further, Benedict moved. He didn't offer reassurance. He offered action. He wrapped an arm around her waist, pulling her flush against his chest. She could feel the slow, tectonic power of his heart beating against her ribs. "Hold your breath," he murmured against her ear, "and do not scream. Sound carries." He leapt. The world dissolved into a blur of wind and rain. They crossed the chasm between buildings in a defying arc of gravity, a dark comet streaking through the night. For a terrified second, Valeria felt weightless, suspended over the dizzying drop of the city streets below. Then, impact. They landed on the slick glass surface of the Zenith Tower's sloping roof. Benedict's boots found purchase where there should have been none, the force of their landing absorbing silently into his supernatural frame. He didn't slide. He adhered to the surface like a spider, his grip iron-clad. Valeria gasped, her fingers digging into his shoulders. "Next time," she wheezed, "we take the elevator. I don't care if Satan is working the buttons." Benedict offered a rare, grim smile. "Noted." He pointed to a massive industrial fan, spinning lazily in the gloom of the roof's maintenance sector. "Ventilation shaft. It will lead us directly to the laboratory levels. The air recycling system is the only unmonitored entry point. Valeria checked the UV rifle strapped to her back, its weight a comforting burden. In her pocket, she carried a dozen glass vials filled with her own blood, grenades of biological acid. She felt lightheaded from the draw Gwendolyn had performed earlier, a ghostly hollowness in her veins. But the adrenaline kept her focused. They pried the grate open and descended into the belly of the beast. The interior of the tower was a stark contrast to the Gothic warmth of the Frostmore estate. It was a sterile maze of white corridors, humming server banks, and air that smelled of ozone and antiseptic. It was quiet. Too quiet. The silence wasn't empty. It was waiting. "He knows we are here," Benedict murmured, pausing at a junction where the hallway branched into darkness. His eyes scanned the spectrums Valeria couldn't see. "He is inviting us in. The security grid has been deactivated." "Then let's not be rude," Valeria said, her voice steady despite the trembling in her hands. "Let's go crash the party." They reached a massive set of double doors labeled Bio-Integration. Benedict placed his hand on the metal, closed his eyes for a second, and pushed them open. The room beyond was a cathedral of technology, a blasphemous mix of hospital and server farm. In the center, suspended in a tube of amber liquid, floated Sylvia. She appeared unconscious, wires attached to her temples, her uniform drifting like seaweed around her. Standing before the tube, flanked by two hulking, cybernetically enhanced guards whose skin was a patchwork of flesh and chrome, was a man in a pristine white suit. He looked human, painfully so, but his eyes gave him away. They were digital irises, shifting, zooming, and clicking like camera lenses, devoid of a soul. "Welcome, Benedict," Edgar smiled, his voice resonating from high-fidelity speakers in the walls rather than his throat. It was a surround sound divinity. "And the prodigal daughter returns." "Let her go!" Valeria shouted, raising her rifle, the laser sight dancing on Edgar's forehead. "Go?" Edgar laughed, a sound that lacked warmth. "My dear, she is the processor for my new network. Her human brain is remarkably compatible with my hive mind software. A simple, uncluttered mind. Perfect for data storage. But you are the power source I've been waiting for." Benedict stepped in front of Valeria, a shield of ancient rage and shadows. The air around him seemed to drop 10 degrees. "You speak of her as a component, Edgar. That is why you will fail. You see biology as code to be rewritten. But she is the alchemist's masterpiece." Edgar's digital eyes narrowed, the lenses rotating with a whirring sound. "The alchemist was a fool. Your brother Benedict. He fell in love with a human scientist. He thought he could cure our bloodlust by merging our DNA with hers, an evolution through love, not technology. Instead, he created a weapon." Valeria froze, the rifle dipping slightly. "My father was a vampire?" "Your father was Julian Frostmore," Edgar sneered, walking around the tank, tracing the glass with a pale finger. "Benedict's younger brother. And your mother was Dr. Eleanor Stonebrook. They tried to hide you, to keep you safe from the destiny of our kind. Julian died protecting you from me 20 years ago. I burned their lab to ash. I thought the child died with him." Benedict didn't look back at her, but his posture softened, the tension in his shoulders revealing a grief carried for decades. "I searched for you, Valeria. Julian hid you too well. He suppressed your nature, bound your powers, until tonight. When you touched Tristan, the seal broke." Valeria looked at her hands, the silence she carried, the immunity to compulsion, the toxic blood. It wasn't a random mutation. It was a legacy. She wasn't just a waitress who got lucky. She was the bridge between two warring species, designed by love and science. "Enough history," Edgar snapped, bored with the sentiment. "Guards, harvest her. Leave the king for me." The cyber guards lunged. They moved faster than the ones at the mansion, their limbs blurring with hydraulic speed. They were monstrosities of war, vampire strength, augmented by titanium skeletons. Benedict met them head-on. He caught the fist of the first guard, the impact creating a shockwave that shattered the glass panels of the server banks, sending showers of sparks raining down like fireworks. But the second guard flanked him, a blade of energized plasma extending from its wrist with a crackle of blue light. "Benedict!" Valeria screamed. She didn't aim the rifle at the guard. She knew her aim was shaky. She aimed at the floor beneath the guard's charging feet. She pulled a vial of blood from her pocket and threw it, shooting it mid-air with a desperate prayer. The vial shattered. A mist of red blood sprayed over the guard's legs. The effect was instantaneous and horrifying. The metal alloy of the guard's legs hissed, bubbled, and melted like wax in a furnace. The machine man toppled, screaming, a digital, glitching shriek as the corruption spread into its circuitry, turning steel to sludge. Edgar watched, fascinated rather than horrified, tilting his head. "Magnificent. A living virus. Your DNA deconstructs the synthetic bonds." While Benedict tore the first guard apart with his bare hands, ripping the cybernetics from the flesh, Edgar stepped toward Valeria. He didn't run. He glided, levitating slightly off the floor. Magnetic repulsion technology hummed beneath his shoes. "Stay back!" Valeria fired the UV rifle. The beam hit Edgar's chest, but a shimmering, hexagonal force field absorbed the energy harmlessly. "Light cannot hurt me anymore, child," Edgar gloated, drifting closer. "I have evolved beyond the sun. I am the eclipse." He raised a hand, and Valeria was lifted off the ground by an invisible force. She choked, clawing at her throat as telekinetic pressure clamped around her windpipe. "Valeria!" Benedict roared, turning from the wreckage of the guard. He lunged for Edgar, a blur of motion, but Edgar merely flicked a finger. Benedict was slammed against the wall by a wave of gravity, pinned like a butterfly to a collector's board. The wall cracked behind him. "Now," Edgar whispered, floating closer to Valeria, pulling a syringe from his coat. "Let's drain that precious blood and see if I can synthesize it for mass production." Valeria's vision blurred, black spots dancing at the edges of her sight. The pressure on her throat was crushing, cutting off oxygen. Through the haze, she saw Sylvia in the tank behind Edgar, her friend's face peaceful, oblivious to the war being fought for her soul. "Do not let him sleep," the voice on the phone had said that first night. "If he sleeps, he dies." Valeria realized she wasn't just fighting for herself. She was fighting for Tristan, for Sylvia, for the lonely king pinned to the wall who had lost his brother and found his niece. She stopped struggling against the chokehold. She let her arms fall limp, feigning unconsciousness. Edgar smiled, a grotesque expression of victory. He floated closer, lowering his defenses, thinking the game was won. He brought the syringe to her neck. Silence, Valeria thought. Be the silence. She reached into her deep mind, finding that place of absolute quiet that Benedict had described, the void where her soul should be. She pushed it outward, not as a shield, but as a weapon, a psychic scream of pure, deafening nothingness. Edgar flinched, his digital eyes flickering with static. The invisible grip on her throat loosened for a microsecond as his sensors tried to process the null signal. That was all she needed. Valeria didn't reach for a weapon. She bit her own tongue, hard, until she tasted the metallic tang of copper. As Edgar leaned in, she spat a mouthful of blood directly into his eyes. The scream that tore from Edgar's throat was not human. It was the sound of a hard drive crashing, of metal shearing, of a reactor melting down. He dropped her, clawing at his face as the blood ate through his synthetic eyes and sizzled into the delicate neural processors behind them. Smoke poured from his sockets. "My vision! My network! I am blind!" Edgar shrieked, blindly firing energy blasts from his hands. The force field flickered and died, unable to maintain coherence. "Benedict, now!" Valeria yelled, rolling across the floor to avoid a stray blast of plasma. The gravity wave holding Benedict vanished. The Vampire King fell to the floor, then launched himself like a missile. He didn't use magic. He didn't use grace. He used brute, primal force. The rage of a brother, avenging a brother. He tackled Edgar, driving him backward through the glass wall of the laboratory. They fell onto the balcony, the rain lashing at them, turning the floor slippery and treacherous. Edgar struggled, his face a ruin of melting plastic and bone. But he was strong. He gripped Benedict's throat with a mechanical hand. "I am the future!" he gurgled. "You are dust!" "You are a glitch!" Benedict snarled, his eyes glowing with blue fire. "And I am the delete key." Benedict grabbed Edgar by the lapels of his pristine, ruined suit and threw him. Not onto the floor, but over the edge of the balcony. Edgar flailed, trying to activate his levitation, but his circuits were fried by Valeria's blood. He plummeted 70 stories, a falling star of white and chrome, screaming until the sound was swallowed by the mist of the city below. Benedict stood panting in the rain, watching him fall until the thud was lost to the thunder. Then he turned back to the room, the monster receding, the man returning. Valeria was already at the tank. She smashed the control panel with the butt of her rifle. The amber liquid drained away with a rushing sound. The glass hissed and slid open. Sylvia collapsed into Valeria's arms, coughing and spluttering, soaked in the strange fluid. "Val?" Sylvia blinked, disoriented, wiping slime from her eyes. "Did I miss the breakfast rush? I had the weirdest dream about a blender." Valeria laughed, a sound that was half sob, sliding down the side of the tank to sit on the floor, holding her friend. "Yeah, Syl, you missed a hell of a shift. I'm taking a sick day tomorrow." Benedict stepped back inside, the rain dripping from his coat. He looked at Valeria, blood on her chin, rain in her hair, holding her friend. He didn't look at her like a king looking at a subject. He looked at her like a man looking at his family. The sun did not merely rise over Oakhaven. It erupted. A bruised purple bruise healing into a brilliant, blinding gold. The storm that had raged for days had finally broken, leaving the world washed clean, shimmering with the kind of clarity that only comes after near annihilation. At the edge of the Frostmoor cliffs, the ocean churned below, smashing against the rocks in rhythmic, white-foamed applause. The air was sharp with salt and the scent of wild rosemary. Tristan sat on the hood of Benedict's matte black car, his legs swinging idly. He was fully recovered, his skin possessing a luminosity that hadn't been there before. He wore a pair of oversized aviator sunglasses to hide his violet eyes, which were currently tracking a seagull with predatory fascination. He was peeling an orange with supernatural precision, the zest coming off in one long, unbroken spiral. In the back seat, the door open to the sea breeze, Sylvia sat wrapped in a heavy wool blanket stamped with the Frostmoor crest. She held a thermos of coffee like a holy relic. "So let me get this straight," Sylvia called out, her voice raspy, but returning to its usual rapid-fire cadence. "You guys are immortal. You drink blood, which is gross, by the way. And the guy who kidnapped me was basically a vampire iPhone." Tristan smirked, tossing a segment of orange into the air and catching it in his mouth. Essentially, though Edgar was more like a vampire android, open source, prone to bugs. He's actually quite funny, Sylvia noted, looking at Valeria. For a brooding goth kid who tried to eat me initially. I didn't try to eat you, Tristan corrected smoothly. I merely assessed your nutritional value. It was low. Too much caffeine. Valeria stood a few feet away, near the precipice. She laughed, the sound light and free, carried away by the wind. She looked different. The waitress uniform was a memory, replaced by the sturdy, elegant clothes of the estate. Her hand was bandaged where she had drawn blood, but beneath the gauze, the skin was already knitting together, faster than humanly possible. The nanites in her blood, her father's legacy, were settling, integrating, no longer a volatile weapon, but a part of her being. She felt the ground beneath her feet, really felt it. The vibration of the waves, the hum of the earth. The silence in her head was no longer a terrifying void. It was a canvas. Benedict approached her quietly. He didn't loom anymore. He stood beside her, his presence a solid, grounding shadow against the blinding light of the sun. He had shed the ruined tactical armor for a simple dark coat, the collar turned up against the wind. "The council called," Benedict said, his voice low, vibrating in his chest. "News of Edgar's fall has travelled fast. The scavengers are scattering. The old guard is intrigued." Valeria turned to him. The sunlight caught the blue of his eyes, making them look like the deep ocean. Intrigued by the girl who melted the cyborg. Intrigued by the alchemist's daughter, Benedict corrected gently. "They want to know if you will take your father's seat at the table of night. It has sat empty for 20 years. It belongs to you by blood and by right of conquest." Valeria looked back at the city skyline in the distance. The Zenith Tower, now just another building, headless and silent. "I don't know anything about being a vampire noble, Benedict. I know how to balance a tray of drinks. I know how to fix a grill. I know how to survive on minimum wage." "You possess a power we have not seen in centuries," Benedict said, taking her hand. His skin was cool, marble smooth, but hers was warm, pulsing with a life that bridged two worlds. "You have the silence, the ability to move between the beats of a heart. You saved my son. You saved me." He stepped closer, closing the distance until they were sharing the same breath. "We have been hiding in the dark for too long, terrified of our own shadows. Teach us, Valeria. Teach us how to live in the light without burning." Valeria squeezed his hand, feeling the strength in his fingers. She looked over at the car, at Tristan, the boy she had saved, and Sylvia, the friend she refused to lose. This wasn't a world of monsters anymore. It was just a family, strange and broken and beautiful. "I can try," she smiled, a genuine, tired, hopeful smile that reached her eyes. "But I have conditions. First, no more kidnapping. Second, Sylvia gets hazard pay. And third, I really need a proper espresso. That diner swill isn't going to cut it if I'm going to be a queen." Benedict laughed, a rich, deep sound that startled the seagulls and made Tristan look up from the car with a rare grin. It was the sound of a king who had finally remembered jaw. "As you wish, my queen," Benedict said, raising her hand to his lips, kissing the knuckles not with hunger, but with devotion. "The treasury and the espresso machine is yours." Valeria looked out at the horizon, where the sea met the sky. The future was unwritten, dangerous, and likely full of politicians with fangs. But for the first time in her life, she wasn't just waiting for the shift to end. She was ready to start the day. Did this story of blood, betrayal, and romance capture your heart? If you want to see more of Benedict and Valeria's journey as they navigate the dangerous world of vampire politics and see if Sylvia gets her hazard pay. Please, like this story, share it with your fellow night owls, and subscribe for the next chapter of the Oakhaven Chronicles. What powers do you think Valeria will develop next? Let me know in the comments below.